Exploring as a really young child, I found what I thought was a dead, duck-billed platypus while on vacation on Lake Arkansas. My parents told me that was impossible because they don't live there, but I'm pretty sure they do. I still think about it, even now over 40 years later. I was a brand new truck driver, taking a load from Hurricane City, Utah to Fontana, California. New guys get the shitty loads, so I picked up at about 10 p.m. and had to have it there by 9 the next day. That run is boring as hell, all flat, straight interstate through the middle of featureless desert. This was before GPS, so I had a little latitude in setting my route. I figured I would cut south through the Mojave Desert to 29 Palms and at least get some great stars out of it. The drive was fine until I was about an hour into the absolute middle of nowhere, about 3 a.m. There was a range of mountains/hills to my right, and I saw a startling green light pop up out of nowhere, arc across the sky for about 3 seconds, then vanish. It happened once, twice, 3 times. That's it. Nothing more. Now, in the light of day, 15 years later, I can say logically it was probably just something military out of the close-ish base, artillery or flares or something. But at the time, all by my lonesome in the middle of a desert, I was totally seeing alien abduction scenarios and nearly shitting myself. I never made isolated solo runs like that again if I could avoid it. This past year, while exploring off-trail at a recently opened state park, we found this really strange place in the woods that is probably about an acre or two of land that is always pitch black, even in the middle of the day. We ran through it, and it feels creepy as hell. When we checked it out from overhead on Google Maps, it just looks like any other pine forest. The thing is, most creepy things people claim to see in the woods they could be lying about or have been mistaken. This creepy, light-absorbing patch of woods we've revisited many times. I could take any one of you there and show it to you. Edit. Here it is. It's that patch of dense pines. As far as I can tell for any logical explanation is that for some weird reason, the canopy grew so incredibly dense that it blocks all light from getting in. But as for how or why trees would grow like that, I have no idea. Story 1. I went to some random chat room a few years ago. There was this strange girl who was quiet all the time, but was there every day for so many hours on end, so I got curious about her. I struck up a conversation in hope of getting to know her better. What if she's shy? So, I spent all the time on trying to draw her out of her shell, and finally I got her to talk to me in a few days. She seemed nice at first, but odd at times. Then one day, I was in a private conversation with her to talk about random stuff, and all of a sudden my hand started to shake violently, and it wouldn't stop. Then I took a break from internet to relax, since I couldn't type anyway. I stopped shaking immediately after I stopped talking to her. I came back to talk to her again, and the shaking slowly comes back, but not as bad as before. She asked me if I felt anything weird, and I didn't say anything because I was confused by her question. She then kept asking if I experienced any sensations at all, and then I started to get a really weird feeling about her. She proceeded to tell me that she was practicing witchcraft on me and wanted to see if it worked. Keep in mind, the violent handshaking never happened to me before, and still to this day, I have never had that experience since then. I'm not sure if it's just a weird coincidence or if it actually happened. I'm very skeptical on a lot of things in life, but this made me confused still to this day. I'm not gonna lie, she always creeped me out since day one, and I used to have a weird gut feeling about her, but I brushed it aside since she seemed nice and harmless. After that experience, she opened up about her fantasies of killing people and went into details on how to do so. I noped right out of there and never looked back. Story 2. This story is not scary at all. When I was 4 years old, I was basically a bee whisperer. I used to play with bumblebees. They loved me. They rested on my hands, and I used to tell bees how amazing and beautiful they were. I loved their fur, which its colors used to radiate brightly in the sun. I was enamored by its beauty. They buzzed gently on my finger while I showered them with compliments. Anytime I would do something that they didn't like, such as plucking flowers, they would buzz violently in front of my face as if they are crossed with me, but at the same time it was warning me not to do it anymore. I would get sad and apologize profusely, and then they would go back to my fingers, buzzing gently, and everything would go back to normal. Here is the backstory. I couldn't speak or hear at the same level as other children around this age, so I was delayed when it comes with communication. All the knowledge about bees at that time were unknown to me because no one would be able to communicate with me about anything, but I somehow knew a lot about bees. Don't ask me how, I just knew. For example, I knew bees would become violent and attack you if you exhibited fear, which is scientifically true, but no one told me this at the time. My sister knew I was a bee whisperer, as she saw me interacting with bees every day and saw the bees listening to me and doing things I asked them to do. It used to freak her out. One day she got close to the bees by accident and started running for her life. I told her to stay calm and the bees won't attack her. I couldn't stop the bees from attacking her since the bees turned on some kind of instinct. When she hid in the house, the bees went back to normal and rested on my fingers. I tried to befriend wasps, but wasps were very distant and cold, and they were basically warning me if I go near them, they would attack me. I went back to the bees crying about it and not understanding why wasps didn't like me and wouldn't want to be friends with me. It crushed my spirits. The bumblebees comforted me. I know it sounded crazy, but bees were very sweet and wise. It told me a lot about bees and some things about life in general at that time through some kind of buzzing, and I understood what they were saying somehow, and there was no way that I could possibly know since I was very limited in terms of communication. It provided me some kind of comfort from being isolated from being able to communicate at that time. My siblings could back my story up very easily. My sister used to tell people about me being a bee whisperer. I know this story sounds crazy, but there are things to life that we could not possibly understand. Well, now I can't really communicate with bees anymore. When I started going to school and my communication got better, I got really busy with developing my communication skills, school, and extracurricular activities. I never got the chance to play with bees, so over time it was forgotten, which was truly a shame. This happened almost 10 years ago during my first year of university. I lived on res with my best friend, and we were pretty close with everyone on our floor, except for one exceptionally creepy dude. Let's call him CD. Before this night, CD had always been a bit odd, but he seemed harmless. One example of the weirdness, he told my roommate that he had fantasies/dreams about her chasing him with a long black whip and emasculating him. I get that everyone has their tastes, but he and my roommate were not close, and it was obviously not appropriate to say something that intimate to her. They just didn't have that kind of relationship. Anyways, everyone on the floor hung out together, including CD, and always partied in a big group. One night, we pre-drank in someone's dorm and went out for karaoke at a bar close by. After that, we all headed back to campus, and most of the group went to bed. About 5 of us stayed up and chatted in the hallway in a circle. This was when we finally noticed how weird CD was acting. What was weird about him was how quiet and still he was. Also, his eyes were wide open. He wasn't blinking, and he was staring off, not looking at any of us. His eyes were creepy enough on a good day because he was missing half his eyelashes on one eye. Apparently, he was attacked by a dog when he was a little kid. Back to the story. CD just stood there staring while everyone else talked. You know how when you're standing around for a while, you might lean against a wall or shift your weight from one foot to the other? Well, this guy just stood still. His feet were perfectly together, while his back stayed straight and rigid. No one addressed him or mentioned how creeped out they were, but the awkward smiles and raised eyebrows made it obvious that we all felt the same. Suddenly he punches the wall really hard and goes back to standing still and staring off. That was enough. My roommate and I got out of there while the guys brought him to his room. As tired as we were, we couldn't fall asleep. We talked for almost an hour about how weird that incident was and speculated over what the hell was wrong with CD. During a pretty long pause in our conversation, I guess my roommate was drifting off to sleep, I heard a soft scratching at the door. I listened for a bit, and the scratching became a very quiet knock. I got up, looked through the peephole, and saw CD tapping at my door. I froze with shock and watched him try the handle a few times, then walk away shortly after finding it locked. Side note, no one on our floor ever locked their doors unless they were changing. We were a close group, and we tended to drift into each other's rooms to hang out. Thankfully, my roommate and I always locked our doors when we went to sleep. Anyways, I woke my roommate up and told her what just happened. Just as I finished my story, the soft knocking started up again. We both bolted to the door and took turns peering through the peephole. He tries the door handle again and then starts scratching at the doorknob with some kind of tool. My roommate whispered, "He's trying to pick the lock." We watched him in horror as he kept trying and failing to pick the lock. The creepiest thing about this whole thing was the fact that he had been knocking just loud enough to be heard by someone awake, but not loud enough to wake someone up. He was checking to see if we were awake, while making sure he didn't wake us because he wanted us to be asleep. Looking back, I should have kicked the door and yelled at him to go away. Instead, we stupidly watched CD, grabbed the heaviest thing within reach and waited. Luckily, CD walked away again, probably to look for a better tool. We waited for him to be out of sight, ran to our neighbor's room and pounded on the door until they let us in. We spent the rest of the night there. The next morning, word spread and our friends went to talk to him. Apparently, he had been struggling with insomnia and was on some potent sleeping pills. That night, he had taken extra pills before drinking tequila. He said he didn't remember doing any of those things and wanted to apologize to us in person, but our friends passed on a letter to us instead. I have no idea what would have happened to us if we forgot to lock our door that night. I really hope that was a one-time thing and that he never hurts anyone. I never heard any other stories of him acting dangerous before or after that night, but I still regret not reporting him. Too long didn't read. The creepy guy in my residence mixed sleeping pills and tequila, had a bad reaction, and tried to break into mine and my roommate's dorm room in the middle of the night.